Greetings and welcome. We are in 303 and we turn back now to Mr. Conrad's Unstoppable Volume, Lesson 25. It's entitled number 63934. The focus for your journals really quickly is conflict resolution. Let's go ahead and write that down. Conflict resolution is the key to the well-lived life. That is to say, proper conflict resolution. When conflict happens in our lives, the question is always, how specifically do we best resolve that conflict? We're going to read about a young man who did not resolve conflict very well at all. Many have argued that it may be this event that in many ways really did turn Mr. Conrad in the direction of the Unstoppable program that he's so famous for. Page 83 of your volume. He wasn't always a number. Read with me, please. He wasn't always a number. For the first 19 years of his life, his name was Don Smith. He was a student of mine for 3 years. Although he wasn't one of the best woodworking students I've ever had, he never caused me a problem. But that all changed the night he became number 63934. Shortly after he left high school, Don stopped by our house one day. He needed a place to live and wanted to rent an apartment. I had a policy never to rent to my students, but I made an exception for Don to this day. I regret that decision. I explained the rules to Don. No parties or underage drinking for obvious reasons. The last thing I needed was to have kids drinking on my property. Your first party will be your last one, I told him. Little did I realize how prophetic that statement would be. He agreed, and all went well until the night of December 16. A gentle snow was falling, and I was shoveling the sidewalk. I could hear a commotion coming from Don's apartment. I walked over, knocked on his door. A party was going on inside. Don, it's way too loud. I can hear you clear out to the street, I said, as he opened the door. Then I looked inside. I could see everyone was drinking. I asked the one kid, "How old are you?" "I'm 18. Who the bleep are you?" was his drunken response. I told him who the bleep I was. I also told all of them to get their bleeping rears and bleeping gear and get the bleep out of there. I watched as Don and his buddies walked through the snow after leaving his party. I was thinking about what I had told him before he moved in. Your first party will be your last. Tomorrow, I would notify Don that he would need to find another place to live. Tragically, before morning, Don would be living in another place, a place that no one would want to call home. And he'd be living there for a long, long time. After Don and his buddies left the parties, they drove to the convenience store, bought more beer. Then they went to the dance at the high school. They got kicked out of the dance when it was discovered they'd been drinking. They drove to the liquor store, got more beer. Later that night, the party resumed again at Don's apartment. Luckily, I didn't hear it. I would have lost it on Don the second time if I would have had to break the party up again. Don's uncle, who he worked for, heard about the party. When the uncle showed up at Don's apartment that night, it was to get his son and take him home. Don and his uncle got into an argument. His uncle's last words were, "I'm calling the police to report underage drinking." With his party busted up a second time, Don sat on his bed, sulking. He hated his uncle for this, among other things. So with the help of 15 or so beers, Don walked to his uncle's home. He milled around a bush outside while his uncle lay watching TV inside. Those footprints around the bush would later incriminate Don. "You had time to think," the police officer would later state at the trial. Then Don kicked open the door and shot his 46-year-old uncle 6 times in the chest. He shot him with his .22 caliber rifle and killed him. Don was arrested later that morning. He was discovered walking less than 2 blocks from his apartment near 8th and Rose Streets with a loaded .22 caliber rifle strapped to his back. His blood alcohol was .15 1 hour after his arrest. The next day, police taped off his apartment as a crime scene. No one was allowed in. When they finally removed the tape, I entered his apartment. Don had a box of magazines in the kitchen, and he used that box as a target. He'd sit in his living room and practice shooting. Sometimes he missed the box and there were bullet holes in the kitchen wall. I found another box near his bed. This one was filled with photographs. I opened up a manila envelope. It had his class pictures from kindergarten through high school. I laid them in chronological order on his bed, staring at those pictures of an innocent grade schooler. What happened, I thought, that would take this innocent kid and turn him into a cold-blooded killer? What could I have done to stop this? What could anyone have done? Great questions, right? I needed to talk with Don, so I planned to go to jail and visit him. I talked to him on the phone while looking at him through the glass window. He was crying. We talked for a while, and then I asked him the question, "Why did you do it?" Don told me that his hatred towards his uncle had been brewing for a long, long time. He showed no remorse. Less than a week later, Don sent me one of many letters. The first one was about the dream. We'll meet that one in a bit. Final comment here is what a tragedy for the kids who get pulled back into the bucket and never get the chance to become the unstoppable you. Let's just jot down a couple of observations here really quickly about this tragic story. First, notice the power in your journal. So let's jot this down. The power of a negative thought that can lead to rage, that can lead to actions that you just cannot take back. It's a powerful string of events in our word picture here. Notice as well, of course, the power of alcohol when mixed with rage. And this is one of the reasons why so regularly, of course, Mr. Conrad is going to make this observation of how devastating underage drinking is. And, of course, drinking even by legal people. Finally, again, let's go back to the focus. Proper conflict resolution is the key to a happy life. The challenge, of course, is to reflect back to the last time that you truly lost it and to ask, was there a better way to resolve that conflict? Can I learn from that experience so that going forward, I'm able to somehow maybe find more healthy ways to resolve conflict? Thank you. A tragic story and yet an important one.